Thank you for joining us. It's nice to see some familiar faces as well. As you know, today I'm going to be talking to you about creating a coaching culture. So most of you are leaders within your organizations, leaders of teams, or even just self-leadership. So as many of you will know, but I'll introduce myself. So my name's Zoe, and I'm the founder and CEO of Luminary Mindset Consulting. You will also see Heather. Do you want to wave, Heather? We've got Heather, who's part of the team. She's with us today, and we've got Jay in the background. I just want to really start by acknowledging my team. Jay and Heather do everything. I show up and talk, but they set everything up. They run everything in the background. The reason we're all here today is because of their immense efforts. And Heather is actually based in New York. So whatever time it is in New York at the moment, thank you, Heather, for being here. It's not a sociable hour, that's for sure. And Jay's based in London. So thanks, team. So the importance of today, now I'm really excited about today because this is one of my deep passions. As most of you know, I started my life as an accountant, and then I went into internal audit and risk. And the reason I loved internal audit was because you got to ask questions. I love asking questions and I love being curious. Now, most auditors that I came across weren't using internal audit to ask questions. Many of them wanted to be subject matter experts and wanted to advise and consult with the organizations they were working with, which was great. I do like consulting and advising, but really my passion is about understanding an organization, understanding its strategy, its risk profile, understanding where its weaknesses might be, and then helping them develop strengths around those weaknesses. So it was about 10 years into my career where my CEO said to me, "You're not really auditing us, you're auditing us and you're doing it really well, but you're also coaching us to the answer. You're not giving us the answer, but you're helping us develop our own solutions in partnership." So I didn't realize I was doing that. I'd never been coached myself and I hadn't had any exposure to it. But he suggested that I do coaching as well as my internal audit and risk role. So we're going to talk in this webinar about a bit of that journey that I went on, what it is, what the qualification is that I acquired, what it means to train as a coach, how you then introduce that into your leadership and into your workplace. Because I didn't actually give up my corporate job until after I became a coach. So I became a coach while in a leadership position as a director of audit and risk for a FTSE company in London. And what I did was put my poor team, with their permission, used them as guinea pigs. So I said, do you mind if I use the, practice on you, because I'm learning all of these great new skills? And they said, yeah, sure. And we'll talk about that case study later, but there were some absolutely dramatic results. And I actually couldn't believe it initially. I couldn't believe the power of the coaching tools that I was being gifted with through my coaching school. So I'm going to share some of that with you today. I'd also really like to invite you to get involved. So if you've got any questions, this is not a case of, it would be mortifying if I'm just sat here for the next 50 minutes talking at you. Now, those of you that have been on these before, you know that I love a question. I love a bit of interaction. So if you have any questions, or if you have anything that I say that doesn't quite land, or you want me to explain more, please just raise your hand. So at the bottom of your screen, you should have a reaction button. Raise your hand or just shout out at me and we'll stop and I'll answer your questions.
I'll start now. Zoe,
I know you will, Matthew. I know.
Yeah.
Go on. Have you got a question?
What facility did you get coached by over in London?
Oh, it was the school at Animas, the School of Transformational Coaching. So they're called Animas, and we've got a quote from their CEO later. Really, really awesome coaching school. And then as a result of that accreditation, I was then certified by the International Coaching Federation, so the ICF as well. Okay. Great question. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
We will get started. So the history of coaching. Now, most people associate coaching with the sporting world, Phil. I know that Phil Moss, who we've got on today, is a very, very excellent coach in the sporting world here in Australia. And it's common, right, that Olympians and sports men and women have coaches, and it's standard. We also know that there's a lot of coaching used within the military, so the Air Force, the Army, the Navy. So again, it gets referenced a lot in the military sector and the special services. We now know that it's commonly associated with executives and leadership. So leadership coaching is becoming a much more common used set of terminology. However, that wasn't always the case. So we're going to start with the history of coaching. And you can see the other three areas that we're going to go through today, the impact of a coaching culture. So what difference can having a coaching culture have on your leadership and your organization? some specific coaching techniques that I'd like to share with you that I think are the ones that made the real difference for me and my team, and also with the clients that I work with now. And then we've got some time for questions and follow-up if they don't come through as we're talking. So, quick, brief history of coaching. So the first use of the term coach around 1830 in Oxford University. It was a term that was referenced to refer to someone who helped carry a student through an exam or from where they wanted to be to where they wanted to get to. So really back in 1830, a long time ago, the academic world started using the term coach. Then humanistic psychology. So many of you will have heard of Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers' work is absolutely fascinating. I love Carl Rogers. And then, of course, we've got Abraham Maslow. So you may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was fundamental back in the 60s when they were looking at the human potential movement, which was something where Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow were really interested in what motivates people. What is it intrinsically within us as human beings that has us be motivated and show up as the best or not the best version of ourselves? So there's a lot of books and studies and research, and a lot of self-help books today are based on the foundations of the humanistic psychology themes that Rogers and Maslow developed together. And then Tim Galloway, if you haven't read the book, The Inner Game, it's a great story. Tim Galloway, it's about tennis. He wrote this book in 1974. And the reason that I reference this book is I'd like to read a quote from it that Galloway wrote himself, which is, I suggest that the inner game of a player, so this is a tennis player, the inner game of a player, which is the psychological attitude, is as important as the external game, which is the physical skill and competencies. In other words, the struggle against one's own doubts, fears, and self-limiting beliefs is as important as the struggle against an external opponent. Now, that really got me, that quote, when I read this book, because I thought, wow, not many of us are, as we're growing up, and if you've been on my previous webinars, I talk about education and how schools and the education system taps into our IQ and our intellect, but it doesn't really tap into what Galloway is suggesting, which is that psychological attitude or that winning mindset that some people call it, or that competitive edge, which all comes from internal within, doesn't it? So I love that book. I'd highly recommend it. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Do you mean emotional intelligence?
Yes,
EQ?
as well. Yes, emotional intelligence, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Because, is it true the education system? It's been, It's been highly criticized by a lot of social scientists, saying that it's too biased towards the left brain and it's very overly rational, overly logic, and that's why we have all these standardized tests. So it's very too technical and not enough interpersonal skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always I never form judgment on these things because there's always benefits and costs to all modalities and all ways of being. But my balanced view on the education system is it was designed after World War II to really support us through an industrial and technological evolution. So it was focused on people being able to develop skills that are very logical and very left brain. So engineering capabilities, technical capabilities within the IT space later on in the 70s and 80s, but also it's measurable. So you can measure IQ, you can measure, you need to measure education, apparently, is the basis of that. So there is a reason for it being so focused on IQ, but it doesn't necessarily help us and our children develop the skill sets required to now lead successfully in their own lives. Because a lot of what we do is interpersonal, a lot of what we do is relationships. Well, everything that we do is relationships from my perspective. And who we are and how we're showing up and who we're being and what control or choice we have over who we're being, for me, I believe determines more great leadership than what they know. If you attend one of my other webinars on becoming a leader, I talk about leadership kryptonite. And as we're moving through the hierarchy within the corporate world or within whatever profession it is that we're moving through, we need to be subject matter experts on that journey. So we need to be credible and reliable and know the answers and be able to provide the solutions and provide good answers to our leaders and to our stakeholders. And as you climb that leadership ladder, you need to start letting go of that knowing in order to be a great leader. You need to be more curious. You need to trust your team have the answers and you don't have the answer. And you need to be able to decentralize from yourself that knowing and that subject matter expertise. Now, a Luminary Mindset, we work with very, very technical industries. I'm interested in developing the emotional intelligence and coaching capability of high IQ industries. So we work with the mining industry, we work with the tech industry, because that's where there's that most significant imbalance, where even the industry itself is like the education system. So it's very KPI heavy, it's very metric heavy, it's very negativity bias heavy as well. So they'll look for what's wrong, what's missing, what's not working, rather than the positive psychology aspect, which is what motivates and inspires people. So there's all of this going on in the world around us. And thank you for the question. The education system is where it starts. I could talk that. I just nearly went into another webinar there, so I'll just pull myself back. Very passionate about this. So that's the history of coaching. And then present day, executive coaching has come to be viewed as an individualized form of really developing ourselves. And the reason that we focus on executive coaching at Luminary Mindset is because I believe that the culture of an organization is the tone at the top. It's the leaders and the leadership capability that then gets embedded and instilled within the organization. So it's very, very difficult to create cultural transformation bottom up. Even though there's more people, you'd say, well, there's more people, right, at the bottom of the pyramid. So therefore, the behavior of the leadership team and what they expect and what they want, both intrinsically, so the attitudes and behaviors that they're not necessarily aware of, but those things that they're demonstrating through body language, through tone, through the kind of questions that they're asking and how they're asking them, have more of an impact on a culture than the masses being able to develop their own culture, subculture down within the organization. So we always start at the top. The tone at the top is really important. So different modalities of what people think coaching is. So performance coaching. So most people here will have heard of Tony Robbins. I like to use Tony as an example of performance coaching. So this is where we're focused on taking new action, and it's very much about accountability. So it's what's the new action that's going to get you to achieve the objective that you're seeking to achieve? What action do you need to take? Who's going to hold you accountable? And you take the action times and times again. It's also about failure. So it's about dealing with failure, because when you take action, you're not always going to achieve the desired outcome. So performance coaching is very much about that: action, accountability, and dealing with failure. We've got learning coaching, which is actually learning something new. So you're taking on new knowledge, new methods, new ideologies, and then you're using that knowledge to take new action. So it's another layer beneath performance coaching, where you're having some new skill that then creates new action. And then you have to then, sorry, somebody needs to go on mute there. Sorry, thank you. Take the new action, and then again, you've got to deal with the failure as well. Oh. Heather, can you find that person and mute them for me, please? Thank you, because I can't see everybody. Thanks. And then what we do, and what I trained in at Animas, Matthew, is transformational coaching. So transformational coaching is focused on transforming the belief system that underpins the values and behaviours of an individual. Now, this is sustained change. Well, I don't use the word change. It's sustained transformation in a leadership style, in leadership capability. It's a shift in someone's way of being. So we actually look at what are the belief systems that are driving the culture of the organization, both tone from the top, but also you'll have subcultural belief systems, especially in high tech industries where you have to have small mining industry, for example, where you've got crew and you've got people who are working shifts, fly in, fly out. They form small pockets, small subcultures tribally, and they have a shared belief system. They have shared values and behaviors within those subcultural pockets. So how can we get access to that, and how can we transform that so that they're achieving the desired outcomes for the organization? This is also the subliminal messaging. So the belief system of an executive or a senior leader is going to drive their unconscious biases. It's going to have some significance over their diversity and inclusion agenda. It'll have some significance over their recruitment and talent acquisition and retention strategies as well. And it certainly has a lot of influence over the risk management and risk appetite setting within an organization. So a little quote here, great leaders encourage leadership development by openly developing themselves. So this is one of the most uncomfortable conversations that I tend to have with the executives and non-executives that I work with, which is they generally bring me into the organization to help them coach and develop the people within the organisation, and I have to say, well, actually, it starts with you. Please, can you be open to this process as well as us engaging with your teams? Because without the leadership team being as open to the process as everyone else in the organisation, it doesn't tend to have the same impact. And it certainly isn't a sustainable shift in culture. So, what are we doing? In coaching, we're dealing with state. We're dealing with a human state of emotion, everything. So this is the emotional intelligence piece. So whether we like it or not, all of our decisions and judgments are mostly created from a state of emotion. And this is what I call the table of emotions or table of states, which we use in our coaching. This is one of our coaching tools. Now, we have a comfort zone as humans, and certainly in the Western developed world, especially within a capitalist system, we like to be down here, which is in this kind of courageous, competitive, occasionally frustrated, but desiring state. Frustration for many people in the corporate world is a great motivator. I don't know if there's anybody on the call that has that, where you just need that little bit of to get something done. But desire and competition and courage and bravery are certainly very great motivators to get the job done and excel and exceed. However, that is not where transformational leadership lies. That is not where peak performance lies. And Phil, you'll probably resonate with this. It's not sustainable, is it? You can't drive a team on competition alone. There's got to be that galvanizing aspect to team, which is all about the inspiration and motivation. What brings them together, what holds them in that state? Because it gets tough, right? It gets really tough. Times get tough when you're trying to excel and you're trying to achieve elite performance. It's not easy. It's hard. So there needs to be that acceptance, that willingness, and that reason, which you'll see up here in the elevated zone of emotion or consciousness, some people call it, which is the leader's responsibility to create within the organization. So using the coaching tools that I'm going to introduce you to, you can create this elevated zone of consciousness. Not all the time. It's not realistic for us to be in that state all the time. But when you're pulling teams together and trying to get people to accept change, for example, now people don't like change. They're really resistant to it naturally. Even those of us, I say I love change, but it still feels uncomfortable. Maybe I like the discomfort of change. I don't know. But we all feel resistance when we're going through change. So leaders need to be able to lead people through change and lead them through that resistance. So one of the coaching tools that we use is this chart, and we introduce it at all levels of the organization. And we have people recognize when they're in their comfort zone, when they're in their elevated zone, which meetings do you need to have people in the elevated zone to get the best out of them? Where you're pulling together a vision, a business plan, where you're looking 3 years ahead, you probably need people to be in the elevated zone. You probably don't need them to be down in the comfort zone. When you're looking at short-term goals, when you're looking at how we can turn something around that has gone wrong, so problem solving, quick decision making, comfort zone is probably more appropriate because you want people to come up with quick solutions. Now, if you look at the discomfort zone, this has been experienced a lot, not necessarily here in Australia. I mean, I think Sydney's going through this now. I'm in Sydney, by the way. Yeah, highly uncomfortable. I know those of you in Perth, possibly not feeling the impact at the moment. And those of you who are in London, you went through this last year. Now, where there's a lot of change and uncertainty around us, the discomfort zone is where we drop to. And again, from a leadership perspective, it is vital to be able to identify when you have individuals or teams who are in that discomfort zone. They will be feeling fear, they will be feeling grief or regret, they will be feeling apathy. Now, there are lots of people who occasionally drop into apathy, especially when they hear about change. They can dip right down into apathy, and it's not necessarily always visible. They might just be the person that sits at the back of every presentation and doesn't say anything, but then has conversations with people outside of line of sight of leadership to try and maybe bring that state of emotion down around the change, around the news, around whatever it is that's happening. So this is one of those coaching tools, and you'll get a copy of this presentation after the webinar. And if any of you want a specific copy of this that I can draw up in PDF, I'll be happy to send it to you and talk you through it. You will get an opportunity at the end of this to have 30 minutes with me as well, if you want to, if there's anything that I haven't covered in enough detail, but we'll go through that in a second. So Matthew, this is Nick Bolton. He's the CEO at Animas, very, very good friend and colleague of ours. Ever since studying with Animas, it absolutely blew my mind. how effective these coaching techniques are. And so I stayed in close contact with Nick and his team, and very, very grateful to have that relationship in my life and in our lives at Luminary Mindset. So he talks about coaching being a response to a 21st century human condition. Now, what human condition is he talking about? So my interpretation of Nick's human condition is what we're seeing a lot of globally in the corporate world, which is this overworking, high achieving, productive and prolonged performance of individuals and teams. Now we're becoming very performance hungry within the corporate world globally, and there seems to be some confusion. Some people are understanding what that means long term, but there seems to be some confusion around how do we maintain peak performance sustainably, that isn't just about being productive, but it's actually about a more holistic view of the human being, of the teams, of the organization. So historically, again, if we look at that difference between IQ and EQ, we have been trained over the last 30, 40 years in the corporate world to be very focused on tasks, outputs, KPIs, data, less focused on, okay, people, wellness, resilience, connection, relationships, empathy. So again, one of the things that we're trying to do at Luminary Mindset is address that imbalance, because peak performance, sustainable peak performance that can continue year after year after year, has more of a balance between those more IQ and EQ metrics or measures internally. But when you talk to people in the corporate world about performance, they assume you're talking about being productive and doing and having outputs, whereas we talk about the being. So many individuals find this unsustainable, and it can have a significant and lasting impact on people's quality of life and life outside of work. So one of the things that I'm committed to, and people say, Zoe, why do you work in the mining industry? I said, you know what, those people have some of the highest integrity and commitment that I've ever experienced, because they are also risking their lives every day, especially the crews that are working, specifically in the mine or the site itself. So it's really important to them that they have a holistic approach to their performance. They can't turn up to work tired. They do, but they can't and shouldn't. And when they do, it's their crew that hold them accountable. So they've got that integrity, they've got that accountability framework already in place around them. So it's one of the most interesting environments that I've worked in. Same in the tech industry, because it's so complex and it's so mentally draining carrying out the kind of work that they're conducting. And in the tech industry, they work long hours. So while mining's got strict controls around how many hours people can be on site and what they can and can't do, the tech industry has less of that regulation. So you'll find that people do get mentally and emotionally drained quite a lot. So we're looking at a sustainable level of performance. Many people I'll come on to active listening in a minute, but many people that I work with use sporting analogies. Now, Phil, nothing wrong with sport. Sporting is peak performance, so I'm not having to dig at the sporting world. However, sporting, from what I can tell, is you train and train and train for a championship, you win the championship, and then there's kind of a recovery period. There's a celebration, there's a recovery, and then there's a period of time before you then start that training again. It might only be a matter of weeks, but at least there's that pause between one and the other. Now, in the corporate world, and certainly in these high tech industries that I'm working with, they hit year end, they hit their targets, 1st of July, it's back on again. There's no ice bath. So for me in the corporate world, it's really important that we are careful that we don't use too many sporting analogies that may cause some unrest down the ranks, shall we say, because many leaders do use those analogies, and the crews and the kind of the frontline people in the tech industry are saying, well, hang on, I don't get to sit in an ice bath after we've won the championship. I have to get 1st of July, I'm back in the game. So interesting use of language around performance as well. So coaching techniques such as active listening, reality testing, and future pacing can create sustainable performance. And active listening is something that I'm going to take you through in a couple of slides. That's really if you take one method away today, I'd really urge you to take away active listening, which we'll go through in a second. So the impact of a coaching culture. Are there any questions thus far? No hands raised, Heather. I'm going to rely on you because, again, I can't see the reactions. Great. Thank you. Sharing a screen and trying to multitask. I can multitask, but this is a lot of multitasking. All right. Why the corporate world needs coaching. Gosh, this is a story. So people need to feel human and heard in the workplace more than ever, especially after the last 18 months. And again, we have and can sometimes be a little bit transactional in the workplace, I found, and a bit task oriented. So leaders who unlock performance in others listen before telling, trust, and prefer for the organisation to manage upwards. Now, this is why when I said at the beginning, it's really important that we have the enrolled CEOs and executives in a coaching program, because it's letting the organisation manage upwards and letting the organisation run itself effectively, which is one of the keys to unlocking performance in an organisation. But of course, when you're doing that, you experience a bit of unrest, because if you have been managing what I call hub and spoke, so if there's been a centralised leadership or management culture, when you suddenly let go, people can feel a bit unsettled by that. So you have to manage that change. But really, it's about empowering the people beneath you, which is highly important. And these are the three fundamental needs of a human being. So humans want to be seen, heard, and belong. And we address that in our personal lives, right? We see and hear and have our friends and family belong to something, right? They feel connected, they feel important, they feel valued, they feel like they're contributing to something. We don't do that enough in the corporate world. So we work a lot on that with teams. And it's individual, right? What has me feel seen and heard and belong is different to what will have someone else feel seen, heard, and like they belong. So it's the leader's responsibility to say, okay, what is important to you? What kind of acknowledgement is important to you? When is it most important that I listen to you? And what is important about team for you? Because some people are more independent, some people are less independent. There's differences, all of this diversity in what people want and need from the workplace.
Hey, Zoe, I'd just like to speak into that to Matt again.
Thank you, please do, because I am getting a bit tired of my voice. Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought you might want a sip of water or something. Yeah, listening, when I moved into a management role about 5 years ago in my organisation, I wasn't a good listener. But then as I progressed in my my journey, as a manager, and then started doing the coaching that I've been doing, very, very similar to this stuff, my listening changed, and that was a game changer. It was an absolute game changer, because I would talk before, listening, and I was doing it all backwards, and then I flipped it, and I'm like, wow, I've got my team motivated, wanting to work, for me and with this company, and everyone was working together, and it was a massive game changer.
It is. Thank you for sharing that. It is the most powerful thing that I've ever learned. And when they taught me to listen in the coaching school, I was gobsmacked. I mean, I used to pride myself on being a pretty good listener. And then when they taught me to listen, I was like, nah, I wasn't listening. I was not listening ever. We'll come on to that in a second. Thank you for my water break. That was lovely. Okay, so these are my key points around how it can improve your bottom line. Essentially, that's what's important to an organisation as well, right? So ultimately, employee productivity goes up as a result of coaching, having a coaching culture. People want to give that extra 10%, 15%. Some of the organisations that I've worked with, where people will at peak times. So, for example, if there's a big bid or a big sales drive, or certainly in the mining industry, there might be acquisitions. People going for acquisitions. Their central teams who are running that will commit hours and hours and hours to that process. And I'll interview them and I'll say, what has you commit? And they say, what's the people? I don't want to let my team down. I want to support the people around me. So it's that personal relationship, and it's how they feel at work that has them give that extra when it's needed. Now, not sustainable. I wouldn't expect people to give that extra all the time, but there's peak times when it's necessary. And people are more willing to do that and feel good about it, rather than feeling like it's something that they have to do. Staff retention is obviously impacted positively as well, but also something interesting that I've noticed over the last 5 years is project success. Well, lots of organisations suffer with project implementation, and especially large scale projects, like if someone's implementing SAP HANA or a new ERP system, so SAP itself, most of those implementations fail for some degree. Whereas project success, if you're creating a coaching culture and if you're using coaching as part of that project methodology, there's a significant amount of success that can be created from that, especially across the multiple teams. So if it's a large project that spans multiple teams, if you encourage them to create subcultural coaching contracts across the different teams, that can really work as well. Again, just making that point again, it's the leaders that have to be coachable and being open to being helped. So yeah, it's really, really, really important. It's the most fundamental aspect of what we do, which is having the leaders see themselves and look at themselves so that they can then coach their organisation. I must say on that point, one of the things that we don't do is we don't come in and have you be dependent on us as coaches. So I'm committed to creating leaders who are coaches, because I did that for myself and I saw the difference it made. And I think all leaders of all organizations should have these coaching capabilities. It makes such a difference to every single organization if that was the case.
Hey, Zoe.
So, yes.
Me again. Just on that, what do you do when you've been awarded some work with a corporate client? And let's say out of the leadership team, 3 out of 5 are very interested, and 2 or 1, they're just not interested. They don't want to be coached, but it's part of what you're there to do.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, this case study that I'm about to talk to, that exact thing happened. So one case study, an ASX 50 global mining company, we worked with one of their assets in Australia over a 12-month period. And we worked with their senior leaders. Now, only 70% of the senior leaders opted into the coaching. At the beginning of last financial year, they were pushing to achieve one of, a production target that site had never achieved before in the life of the mine. So it was a 30-year target that they were going for. So they brought us in to work with them. Now, in answer to your question, after 4 months of coaching the 70%, the other 30% could see the difference it was making, and they suddenly opted in. So it's if the coaching is achieving the outcomes that you promise, and if it's having the impact and making the difference, as long as it's not more than 50%, where you haven't got that head of steam, you haven't got that, but if it's 20-30%,
like a vaccination, get to that high number.
Oh, don't say the V word, please. Yeah. No, I'm joking. But yeah, it's like that. You've got to have the majority opting in, and then it's a case again of not making anybody wrong, right? Because timing is everything with coaching, and you can't coach someone that isn't inviting you to coach them. You can't impose coaching on somebody, or at least if you do, it doesn't necessarily have the same outcomes. So it's not necessarily a problem. Generally, people will see the why after a couple of months and then jump on board as well. And it's really important, because coaching is all about connection and conversation, really listening and conversation. As long as those senior leaders are sharing the outcomes that they're getting from the coaching interactions. And with this particular company, they achieved their all-time record production at the end of last year. And they said, we couldn't have done it without the coaching. We couldn't have done it without that regular intervention to allow us to elevate ourselves up that table of emotions, get ourselves out of the comfort zone into the elevated zone, and just really start looking at the bigger picture of what's going on for us, what we're doing, who we're being as leaders, creating some new strategies around that, and going back into their role, a different person, just after 90 minutes every couple of fortnights. They would just come and have that space and time. And so then Zoe, oh yes, Phil, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say off the back of Matt's comment and your commentary around that, have you experienced that? I've just shared something in chat around getting the behaviour change first and the attitude change will follow.
Thank you.
Because in my experience, and I'd like to get your insights quickly if I could, there are senior leaders who have had bad experiences under someone's coaching. And bad experiences as coaches. So all of a sudden the confidence drains from them around either coaching or being coached. So it takes that behaviour change, from a good coach. So Zoe comes in, she's a fantastic coach. All of a sudden another session goes by, and then the behaviour change will start to, the attitude change will start to follow. Is that your experience as well?
Exactly that, Phil. So what we start with is looking at their fundamental beliefs around themselves, their own leadership, other people, so their team, both horizontally and vertically, the organisation, but then we also look at their beliefs of the world, like how does the world occur to them? So all of these different contexts are explored, and all of these different beliefs are explored. And if they have a belief around coaching because of a previous bad experience, we'll work on that as well, because I will occur to them as their coach, as their previous coach, because we live in our past, right? Our belief system is based on stuff that happened to us before. Our belief system can't base anything, it can't believe in anything about the future because the future hasn't happened yet. It's all past based. So we look at that, and then we get people present to the impact of that. And then we say, now you can see the impact of that belief. Is that belief serving you? Yes, no. Sometimes they'll say yes, great, carry on. No, okay, what new belief do you need to have? And then we start doing the coaching on the new belief. Okay, well, inside of that new belief, if you have that new belief, what new action will you be taking? What new conversations will you be having? What will be different? What will be new? And then they go out into the workplace and they start exploring and experimenting with that new belief. And then lo and behold, they see magic happen, and they're like, far out, new belief is working. So it's exactly that. It's the behavior that then leads to the action, that then leads to the result. Yeah. Thank you for the question. So another example quickly. So back in London, and this is obviously, I'm not in London, this was brought with me from London, but yeah, I am from England. I was a head of internal audit and risk for a FTSE 120 organisation. And this is the team who were my guinea pigs, and they were working 50 plus hours per week on just delivering the audit plan and managing our risk function. They weren't doing any extra projects. They weren't doing any additional value add work. They just couldn't. They had no time. And after going through the mill with me for 6 months and me testing and trialing things out on them, they went down to 30 hours a week on just delivering the audit plan and managing the risk function. So each of them had 10 hours a week spare to do those exciting projects, to do that value add work. I went down from was 60 to 70 hours a week initially, down to 3 days a week. So I had to go to my HR director and say, I'm really sorry, but I'm doing myself out of a job here because my team are becoming so good at what they do. So I went down to 3 days a week. And that's why when I set up my own company, I said, right, can I set up my own company? And they said, yeah. And this was all because of attending a coaching school and just really implementing them. Now, I can't stress enough, performance is about action. It is all about the action that you take. Those 3 different coaching modalities, so performance, learning, and transformational, all are ways of taking new action. And if you don't take the action, you can't achieve the desired outcomes. So if you are thinking of training to be a coach, please get in the game, playing in the game of coaching as quickly as you can, even if it's on your friends and family, because that's where the learning happens and that's where you actually develop and hone the skills. So coaching techniques, right? Listening. So I'm just going to go straight to the listening one because I just think it's so important. But there's others here, which is holding space and identifying meaning, which is all part of the listening, really. Now, bit of a straightforward comment there. I do like to be straightforward. Your thoughts are not important, is what I'd like you to take away here. Your thoughts are not important. As a coach, your thoughts are completely irrelevant. And what we do is, when we're listening, normal listening, we are thinking. So when I'm speaking now, you're thinking about what I'm saying. Your brain is probably saying something like, do I know that? Do I not know that? What did she just say? Oh yeah, that reminds me of. And there's this constant internal dialogue running in the background while you are listening. Now, to be really, really good at coaching, you've got to be trained in almost turning the volume down on your internal dialogue completely, because there's nothing that you can think that is going to contribute to them as a coach, because coaching is about allowing others to get to the solution themselves. Mentoring is when you've got the experience and expertise and the thought that is valuable. So if you want to suggest or give someone a thought that you've had in your mind or an idea, you have to ask permission in a coaching contract. May I offer you something? And then you're shifting into directive coaching or mentoring, and they have the right to reply and say, no, actually, I'm in my own little stream of thought here. Can we just keep going? And then, or they'll say yes. So it's really important when you're coaching that you're a leader, that you know when to switch your brain on and off, when to dial your own thoughts down and just hold space. Now, one of the most powerful things when you're actively listening and you don't have your own thoughts getting in the way, you hear different things, but you can also just hold space for the other person. Now, that's something that we just don't do. We want to fill space. So when someone stops talking, especially in an extroverted environment, the extroverts will jump in and try and fill the space, because extroverted thinkers, I'm one, it's just a constant dialogue. It's a narrative in my brain, but it's also coming out of my mouth. So I've had to train myself to stop the brain, but also stop it coming out of my mouth as well, because sometimes space can be very catalytic. Space can create thought, additional thought, layers and layers, where problems and new ideas and innovation and creativity can come to life. If we're constantly filling the space, there's no gap, there's no air to breathe. And especially, and again, these high-tech industries that I work in, where there are more introverted thinkers, that space is so important for people to be able to consider and reason and review what it is that they want to then say or articulate. And the final point there is identifying meaning. What are others adding to what has happened? Now, if you've been on any of my previous webinars, we talk about the 2 circles. So stuff is happening in the world. That's what's happening. It is fact. Something has happened. What our brain does is it overlays meaning. It interprets what's happening. It judges it. It perceives it. It makes it right or wrong. That meaning is different for everybody. So we've got 7 billion different meanings going on right now about the state of the world. What we then do is we try and navigate towards others who agree with our meaning making. So we'll then seek agreement. And this is where your unconscious biases come in. And this is where your subcultures come in. Now, if you've got people identifying meaning within your organizations and then they're finding agreement, and this is how unions form, they're finding agreement in the meaning that they're making out of something happening, that's a subculture. That's how a subculture gets created. And it gets created through language, through the listening and through the communication, which is another webinar again. So if you've got any questions on that, please set up 30 minutes with me, because that whole identifying meaning is a really integral part in how cultures are formed and maintained. Leaders as coaches. So I've shared a little bit about my Howden's personal story. Howden's Joinery was the company that I worked at in England. And again, it was just absolutely magical. I mean, my team got a bit unnerved when I started listening to them. When you start listening to people, it's a bit uncomfortable for them because they're not used to it. So you have to explain to them, I'm going to start actively listening to you, which means I'm probably not going to speak as much and I'm going to hold some space. And people initially, it's like, oh no, I don't like this. Like she's, can put people a little bit out of joint, but it is very, very, very powerful. If you want to attend a program or school, do you need to? I mean, the coaching industry is not, it's not, you don't have to be accredited to be a coach. So it's not regulated. That's the word that I was looking for. In my view, it probably should be and will be eventually, but at the moment it's not. I think the experience that I had when I was training to be a coach was invaluable. So although you don't need to be trained as a coach, I would highly recommend it. I don't personally understand how you can coach others if you haven't had that experience yourself. So to have been coached and to have gone through the process yourself, to know when the discomfort comes up, to have felt those feelings, to have empathy with your clients, to have then applied it within your teams, I think is really vital. So you don't need to attend a program, but you can. I think it's really valuable to do so. And if you want to become one, well, you can now. I mean, COVID has been a blessing in disguise in terms of how we can learn and how we can get access to these things. So Animas, where I trained, was face-to-face in London. Now, the benefit of the face-to-face was that we got to actually do live coaching in front of each other. It was really impactful. It was really powerful because you could feel that energy. You could feel the space, how it was shifting, people's listening. You could get tuned into that. Now it's all online. So you don't have that in-person experience, but you can access so many different coaching programs now because they're all mostly online, which means that you've got more variety and more diversity. What to expect from the training. Now, if you want to do it really, really effectively, I'd recommend diving headfirst in and allowing yourself to be coached as part of the process. Now, some people go in and they want to learn how to be a coach up here. And knowledge isn't necessarily power in the coaching industry. Knowing the techniques is one thing, applying them is completely different. And when you're applying the techniques, you're actually doing something to someone's physiology, you're doing something to their state. So not only are you tapping into their belief system, but that belief system causes them to feel things physically and emotionally. So if you haven't put yourself through that process, it's very difficult to empathize or understand or be careful or to know which technique or tool to use in any given moment if you can't put yourself in your client's shoes. So I'd highly recommend being coached as part of your training. And I've got 3 coaches still, and it's been, never ceases to. Anyway, yeah, it's mind-blowing, what you discover, because it's all blind spots, right? At the end of the day, if we didn't need coaches, everybody in the world would be, leading in the best way that they could, but it's all blind spots and subconscious belief patterns that are causing us to show up as we do. Are there any questions on that? Are any questions on anything so far? Again, Heather, I'll need your assistance here because I can't see everybody. So I don't know if there's any hands up or any questions.
I've got one around your coaches, Zoe, because I find that really, really interesting. So you're a coach. So in effect, it's having a coach's coach.
Yes.
So what do you get coached on by your coaches?
So I've got 3 coaches. So I'll start with the most unusual one first. So I've got a somatic coach, so somatic coaching is where you coach your physiology, your body. So that's all to do with breath work. It's to do with building up resilience through going on retreats and, doing sort of ice baths and long hikes and getting sort of into the body and getting into the sensation of experiencing life. Because a lot of us spend a lot of time. Yeah, Wim Hof, we do Wim Hof ice baths and all. Yeah, it's a real great way to release and, restore energy. Apparently 10 minutes of meditation is the equivalent to a couple of hours nap, so high performance. You've really got to understand how your full system works. So it's not just the mental, it's the physical, it's the emotional, it's, some of it's spiritual for me as well, because I practice Buddhism. So I've got my somatic coach, then I've got my spiritual coach who's part of that somatic community, where we talk about the Buddhism and the energy side of things. And then I've got my mindset coach. So my mindset coach is the one who's basically my supervisor. So the person who makes sure that I'm applying the tools and techniques that I've learned correctly, ethically, consistently. So they hold me accountable for my performance, because otherwise who's holding me accountable when I'm doing this work? And it's such a privilege, and you get exposed to it's such a privilege, and you've got to be really mindful of that you're having conversations with people. The confidentiality has to be maintained. It would be very damaging to the relationship and the client if there was any kind of slip or trip. So there's not really much margin. Well, there's no margin for failure from my perspective on that front. That's a good question.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing.
No worries. I've never been asked that question before, and I'm very happy to. Maybe I'll do a webinar on somatic coaching. That would be interesting.
Please do. Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Understanding your body. So, I sometimes will feel something and not know why.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, somatic coaching could help just in that space there.
Well, it really agree. And I bring it into my coaching one-on-one. So I don't necessarily, I've done some workshops where we've brought it in bigger groups, but it's most effective one-on-one, because that emotional scale that I showed you, when people receive news that something's about to change, that they hold dear, that maybe contradicts one of their values or a belief that they have a physical experience when they hear that news. So they go into their bodies, they will feel whatever. For me, if I hear bad news, I feel it in my stomach, right? I get like a kind of tightness and tension in my stomach. And what the brain is doing is the brain is perceiving that new experience or information as threatening. It's then signaling to the pituitary gland to release cortisol and adrenaline to get ready to react or respond to that perceived threat. And then the body goes into a state which we call fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, we can be in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn multiple times a day without anybody noticing, and we might not even notice ourselves, because a lot of people that work in the corporate world, especially people that I coach, are quite shall we say stimulated by cortisol and adrenaline. I know I used to be. So before I got into this, I was a high performer, high achiever. I liked a bit of a burning platform, a bit of pressure. I found it motivated and energized me. But what that does to the body over a long period of time is it doesn't create resilience. So then you end up making less than perfect decisions, or you end up with a foggy brain, or you end up needing to take days off because you're feeling low on energy. But ultimately, a lot of industries and a lot of organizations have people in there motivated by stress hormone. So we do talk about the physiology of in the coaching side of things and how different emotional states are experienced. Change is a big factor for me when you're trying to create a coaching culture, because people get stuck. So when we've had change programs where some people have found that change to be traumatic or uncomfortable, or it's been done in a way that they didn't agree with, which is the meaning making, they then get stuck. There's the resentment, or there's a memory, or there's a sensation, a feeling that they have about leadership, about their team members, about the organization. And we need people to get unstuck in order to transform organizations in terms of performance. Because otherwise, it doesn't matter what you do to try and push people, propel them forward. You can have the best vision statement. You can have, champagne coming out the rooftops at parties and things to try and motivate people. But if they've got a bad memory about change that happened 5, 10, 15 years ago, or even worse, a fatality that may have happened on site, or some, a change of leadership that was really uncomfortable, or a takeover, One organisation I worked with was Telewest and NTL. They merged. They didn't really merge. It was kind of an aggressive takeover, but it was communicated as a merging situation. And more than half of the organisation were deep in resentment about what had happened. And nobody had consulted with them afterwards to say, are you ready to move on? Are you ready to move on from this and create our new future? And half of them were like, no, I don't want to move. I want leadership to come and hear the impact that it had on me, the impact that it had on my families. Because when leaders are asked to make, half their team redundant, it's traumatic. It's traumatic for a lot of leaders to have to do that, but it has to happen, occasionally. And what the organisation doesn't then do is do kind of post-traumatic stress management, where people have been asked to do things or they've heard things that have made them feel deeply uncomfortable. So the early stages of a coaching relationship, we're pretty much trying to unknot most of that, identify where the pain points are in an organisation, where people just aren't prepared to move on, and get them to have the conversations that are needed, which I call completion conversations. So they have completion conversations with their team or with their leaders to say, look, when this happened, it made me feel like this, and I'm just not happy about it. And then people can move on after they've had that acknowledgement, after they've been seen, heard, and they feel like they still belong. So there's a lot of physiology and chemistry and biology and psychology that goes into all of this. Anyway, I feel like I've talked for ages. I have though, haven't I? So 4 minutes left. Has anybody got any final questions before I wrap things up? I've really enjoyed that. Thank you for coming. You're all going to get an email from Heather with the link to this video, so you can take this video away. Also, if any of you want a 30 minutes with me, normally I would just send you the link, but what I've decided to do is I'm supporting a charity called Bright Futures of Bardia. We're building a school in Nepal. My friend Jackie Holt is building a school in Nepal, and so if you do want a 30 minutes with me, I'm just asking for people to make a small donation to that charity. So Heather will set that up if you wouldn't mind emailing. Heather's got it at the bottom of her screen, info@luminarymindset.com. You'll get access to my diary, and then we'd love to raise a bit of money for the school in Nepal. They've had a terrible time over the last 18 months. There are lots of children and parents out there who are in real dire straits at the minute, and they do need our help. At the same time, we've got another webinar, so we've already set up our next webinar. Heather, would you like to introduce that one?
Yeah, so I just dropped it in the link.
In the chat box?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
So we're excited. We're having our first webinar with a guest speaker, Yannick Jacob. It's on the benefits of adopting a positive psychology as a leader. So that is in the chat box. Feel free to sign up. Let me know if you have any questions. We're excited.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, Yannick's amazing. Yannick's based in London, and he trained at Animas as well. And positive psychology, again, in terms of culture and change, if you can embed a positive psychology approach within your organisation, it's what's going to help people get unstuck from whatever it was that was holding them in the past, if indeed there is anything, and help them propel forward. But it's also based on strengths and tapping into people's strengths. If we were to have HR teams who focused on what everyone was doing really well and aligning people to their strengths, we would have almost no need for performance development plans, and we would have much better talent retention schemes going on. So we're going to talk a bit about that as well on the next webinar. So you'll receive all of that information and the recording. Thank you so much for coming and your questions, and hopefully see you on the next one. If there's no other questions, feel free to sign off. And Phil and Matthew, don't forget to connect. however you know each other. That is so random.
Booked in for tomorrow. I'll give you a call, Phil.
I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Zoe. You know, I'm just outside London in West Berkshire, and I so look forward to these webinars that you are doing, just from a personal level, as well as a professional level, as well as the clients that I work with. I think you are quite fabulous, and I'd love to hear more about some of that personal and mind coaching way of life that you're following. It's just wonderful what you're doing, and I deeply, deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
Gail, thank you so much. What acknowledgement. Thank you. Gosh, well, I love doing this. Yeah, that's why I do it. I'm really appreciative of that. Thank you very much. On that note, I'm going to go and continue my lockdown. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Zoe. Take care.
Thanks, Zoe.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.